Brilliant. Welcome back to the No Boring Stories podcast. I, of course, am Alex Street, and this is the place where there is no boring stories being told. And thankfully, we have Rebecca Thomas on the show today, and her story is, anything but boring. And we're going to pull it all out of you, and so that you can share this with us, and we can find ourselves in this story somehow. Rebecca, how are you doing today?
I'm really, really good and super excited to be here. So thank you for having me and thank you for sharing your space. I love that.
Oh, very good. Okay, this is something I don't think I've ever asked another guest or been asked on a podcast, because people say, I'm really excited to be here. What are you looking forward to? What are you excited about in this conversation?
I love unpacking things. Like I love getting clarity and just having new epiphanies around things. And when you have conversations with different individuals, you just find that different pieces get drawn out that just lead to a better understanding. And when you can unlock that piece of yourself, especially as a life coach, then you can then take that lesson and give it to others to use as well. So I always love having new conversations, even if it's about the same type of thing that I've talked before, because those new threads always come up and provide juice someplace else. So
yes, totally agree. I love that. Threads. I love the idea. As soon as you said unpacking, I love unpacking things. I got this immediate visual of moving, and you pack all these things into a box and you wrap all the dishes up in newspaper and everything. Then you go and you unpack them, and you were like, when was the last time I used this mug? Do I really need this? And as you unpack it, it's like something new shows up, and it's something that you realize you didn't need, or it's something that you missed dearly, that you packed in a fury, and then unpacking takes a bit more time, doesn't it? And there's a bit more intentionality as you unpack it, and you realize, where do I put this now in my new place? Oh, we could go deep into that metaphor if we want to. I love it. Such a good start. Okay, let's actually start before we do dive into your story. You told me one of your favorite stories is the Fast and the Furious.
I knew you were going to say that one. I was literally just having this conversation with my sister this morning too. And not just one of my favorite stories, but my favorite romantic movie is Fast and the Furious 6. No lie, makes me cry every time. Die hard till the end of my days. Like, not even lying.
Is that the one where they race cars and there's explosions and stuff?
Is that like
I'm just kidding. That's all of them, isn't it? Is that not?
No, yes, it is. Now they're introducing rockets. So, let's just go there. Not over the top.
Okay. So did you get in from the start, the Paul Walker days?
Oh, for sure. I've been in from the beginning. The funny part is, so like going back to that time in my life, I grew up around cars and helping my dad and my grandpa with a car and riding motorcycles and motorbikes around the property and things like that. But at that time in my life, I was actually dating somebody who was a gearhead. And we used to play like Gran Turismo together and watch Gone in 60 Seconds. And then Fast and the Furious showed up, and that it's just like a combination of the cars. And because I always say in my past lives, I think I was an island girl, a race car driver, and a psychologist. Just for a side note. But then it's also like Dom and Letty and their idea of a family and what's behind that. That's the piece that really sticks out to me, and also why it's my favorite romantic movie. So yeah.
Okay. You just did what I love so much here, because I would say to say that Fast and the Furious is one of the best stories ever told, to me, is a laughable idea. Like that's how I come to this. So I see that. That's obviously why I pulled that out.
And if the first one you saw was Tokyo Drift, I completely understand.
No, that's where I stopped though. And so, but what you just did on the surface, you're like, Tokyo Drift, what a joke. Maybe not. Or sorry, Fast and Furious. Like, what is this? But what you just did was make it an entirely unboring reason for why that is. So why that is, okay. And also there's a bunch of other people in the world that do say that, and that's fine. It's totally cool, and you can love whatever you love. But for you, this was now about, because who I was was this girl who grew up around cars, and I love this and whatever. And then I met this guy who's total gearhead, and the way that we spent time was playing Gran Turismo and watching this and this. And so there's this emotional attachment, and then the family idea, and which we're going to get into why family is so important for you and all that attachment around that. So of course now you emotionally attach to these movies that seem like it's just, you know, fast cars,
like, wait,
fast
what,
women.
You still watch those?
Right, exactly. And but for you, there's so much more to it.
Oh yeah.
And so now for us, there's so much more to it. It's so, well, this is what storytelling is. And I just think you just gave us a really clear picture of exactly what we can do for people, instead of just saying, this is what I think. This is why I think it. As soon as you do that, we're brought in as well.
Yeah.
And you've connected with us. So well done.
Thank you. I didn't even mean to. I'm off to a great start on Friday already.
That's it. This is it. What number are what is it? 10 now? 9.
There's 9, but then they've also, like, there was the Rock movie with Jason Statham. Didn't love that one. I love The Rock, but like that movie was just like, oh guys, like, okay.
It was a spinoff, right?
Was good effort. Yeah, I hope they never do another one. Wow. But please give me more Fast and the Furious.
But I heard Vin Diesel's coming back or something like that. I don't know.
Oh, Vin Diesel never left.
Oh. Again, I stopped when they drifted. That was it. That was the end for me. Once Paul Walker was out.
No judgment, man.
R.I.P.
Yeah, but his brother stood in the one when he passed away. So, yeah.
Welcome back to Fast and the Furious podcast, where we dissect.
Not even Fast and the Furious. Like, my mind's already going. So I'm a huge Marvel fan too.
Right.
And not just Marvel, but comic books and like Wonder Woman, of course. And so Gal Gadot was actually part of the Fast and Furious franchise too.
Yeah. Okay.
So like you can't have, like, just the way it weaves in. I'm like, yep.
Well, and this is the thing, right? So Marvel, again, I would say maybe it's the same thing. Maybe from the outside you could see the same thing. It's what do you mean? It's a bunch of explosives, a bunch of strong people just yelling at each other and fighting and what, like, but what I love specifically, where I attach to in the Marvel series, is the origin story and how that shows up, because so much of the work that I do with people is bringing them to their origin story. And what we want to do is jump to the explosive moments. We want to jump to the Battle of New York and like the Avengers movie, but you can't do that without first understanding what Thor had to go through to get here, what Steve Rogers had to go through to get here, what Tony Stark had to go through. And though those might seem like, really, they make the first Avengers movie so much more easy to jump into, first of all, and relatable and understandable, all of it. And then by the end, we're all crying when...
Which is funny because like all of these movies, so I have this trick I used to do. I did not used to be good at feeling my feelings at all. And so like movies like the Marvel movies and Fast and the Furious, and there's a couple other ones too, which I'll share in a second, but like they helped me feel my feelings. Like for the Fast and the Furious, it was connecting with family that, like, when you have a non-traditional family and people that are actually family that aren't blood, and trying to like understand and receive that, that's where Fast and the Furious played in. When you have like with the Marvel universe, how many things they do that are impossible, but the energy and the brilliance behind it and thinking outside of the box makes it possible. So like that helped me feel more powerful and really step into like what could be possible if we stop telling ourselves all these stories and building these boundaries that didn't need to exist. But then like even feeling sad, like I'm a person that experiences a lot of joy. And I heard something from Brene Brown recently where she talked about the common factor around people who can experience a lot of joy is the fact that they can also feel those heavy, dark feelings, opposed to avoiding them or numbing them or sidestepping them. And so when it came to periods of my life or times in my life when I needed to cry and that wasn't normal for me yet, I would watch Meet Joe Black, The Green Mile, Armageddon, like all of those things. And they would help me express myself and move through the feeling until I actually knew how to do that for myself.
Yeah. It's so fascinating how this is the thing, right? This is why this is the power of story in general, is because those stories helped you move through your story. They explain something that you're feeling inside and are having trouble expressing, but as soon as you see it, you visualize it, there's something there. So my parents both passed away 9 and 7 years ago, and I can attach a movie to each of them. If I
Mhm.
if I want to cry, if
Mhm.
I like baby face weeping cry, I'm
Mhm.
gonna go watch Finding Neverland, and I'm gonna think of
Mm.
my mom.
Mhm.
She created Neverland. She was
Mhm.
this woman. She need and also helped me to have this young spirit that the author, like, it's about the author of Peter Pan, right? And so it's
Uh-huh.
this, she inspired all of that in me,
Mhm.
and I'm a mess. For my dad, it's the movie About Time.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've seen that. It's like weird, fun time
Mhm.
travel, but also it's this guy connecting with his dad the whole time and just wanting that to not end.
Mhm.
And what it does for me, yeah, it's this weird, like, I love the joy in both of those movies. There's such joy and such light
Mhm.
spirit, and yet I I go that's it. If I want to tap into this little pocket of grief that's in my life, and I want to
Mhm.
do it like that, I know exactly
Yep.
where to go. And I think that some of us know, as you said, you're like, I know the movies that do it. I just said I know the
Mhm.
movies that there's books
Oh
that do
yeah,
it.
there's a list.
Right. And sometimes they catch us off guard, right? When you have
Oh, for
experienced
sure.
the grief, when you have
Mhm.
that, all of a sudden you're watching something, you're like, what the frick? What just happened? Like, I was just singing along with Moana and now I'm crying. Why? What is happening
So
here?
do you want to talk about something a little deeper, especially with the grief piece?
Yes, please.
Okay, so 2013, I lost my younger brother. He had been in a car accident about 6 years before that, became a quadriplegic.
Mhm.
And his soul just kind of withered after that. And then, of course, he had all the physical complications that come with becoming a quadriplegic. So between like all of those things, eventually he just kind of lost hope
Mhm.
and he ended up passing away. So exactly 1 year later to the day, the person I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with passed away. So there was like all this grief that happened that was completely different. And just both of these men were completely different pieces in my life. Like, and the grief that I had when my brother passed was completely different from when my significant other passed.
All
And
new too. Like, was that
yeah,
like when your brother passed? Was that the first taste of grief
like
in your
that,
life?
yes.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
really close and really heavy and
Hmm.
somebody so close to me. And then him being like, you know, he was younger than me by like 8 years. So just the
Yeah.
surrealness of that too. But when all of that happened, I ended up going back to the movie piece. I remember right after Jamar was my boyfriend that passed away. And when he passed away, within, I don't know, a couple of weeks or something, I sat down and watched. He had always told me, like, you need to watch Silver Linings Playbook. I had no idea what it was about. So I watched that. I ended up watching, I think it was The Best Man too. There were like three movies I watched within the course of the weekend that I was really looking forward to, and all of them had this common thread of your partner just passed away. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?"
Oh my
Like it's
goodness.
just in tears, but also like, okay.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so even in that,
Mhm.
I mean, I appreciate this because what I would normally do is like, let's go back, let's go
Mhm.
chronologically through the story, but it's worth it to dive into this and see this because
Uh-huh.
as you face that, you experience, you now gain. I was talking about, like, grief is not something, it's not about losing something, but you've
Mhm.
gained something now.
Mhm.
You've gained a feeling, you've gained an emotion that is attached to grief, and this is now something that allows you to experience all the shadows, all the fullness of the
Mhm.
colors of life. Um, and so as you go into that, how long after did you say it was that you watched those movies?
Like within after my boyfriend passed away, it was
Yeah.
within probably 2 or 3 weeks. On a weekend, but home by myself, like just
Is there
really.
healing? Is there some sort of healing
Oh, for
just even
sure.
just turning that happened through that? Through
Um, I don't know about a turning, but I would say definitely a huge permission to just feel how I needed to feel and
yeah.
not worry, like not judge it and not try to repress it and just to move through it. Like there's this article that I love to share with my clients that talks about letting your kids move through the tunnel of emotions to reach the other side, to build
Mm,
resiliency.
mm.
And that always helps me translate, like all of us need to be able to feel those emotions. And instead of trying to fix it or overthink it or second guess it or meet somebody else's standard of how we should be coping, like just moving through
Yeah.
that and getting to the other side.
Isn't that so interesting? Because like as we're in the tail end of a pandemic right
Mm-hmm.
now, but I you go back to last March 2020 was the most emotional 2 weeks, I think, of our society, of our Western
Mm-hmm.
society. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's grieving, there's loss, there's confusion, there's fear. And then you go into April and it's all what is happening, what's going on. And it was there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of emotions. And what has been the most said phrase over the past year and a bit is when things get back to normal. I just want things to get back to normal. And it's like
What
we've
is that?
all had exactly, we've all had to go through the tunnel, but some people, or even in those conversations, I would say we're looking back
Mm.
and wondering like, when's it going to get back to that? But there is no back. There's a
Mm-mm.
normal that's out the window. But if you really want to experience what we're gonna get from this,
Mm-hmm.
it's exactly what you're saying is we have to. So not only letting kids, and there's a whole other effort in that, is how do you
Mm-hmm.
tell kids to not don't stop crying, but sit with them in the crying. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
what we all need is
Mm-hmm.
somebody to sit with and
Yep.
somebody to help us move through that, whether it's again a chronological time of like it's going to take time to move through this tunnel, or
Mm-hmm.
simply just feeling it
Mm-hmm.
and coming through. The tunnel idea is really interesting.
I'll have to send you the article. It's
Yeah.
like I remember the first time I read it and it was just like just mind
Yeah.
blown over reading it and also connecting all the dots.
Well, and it's such a sense of going from there to there,
Mm-hmm.
which is again, we're focusing on stories. This is the story. And you think of even from March 2020 to now, and we're
Mm-hmm.
recording this August 2021. So what's your story from then to now?
Mm-hmm.
And we all have this story and we've all been through something. And I guess the invitation is, have you been willing to enter in, or have you been trying to turn around and
Uh-huh.
go back? And
Yep.
this is good. Let's
I could see your gears moving. Like literally. No.
so all this from Fast and the Furious, who knew?
Hey.
Um, what is it? We haven't even like we're 20 minutes in. I don't even know what you do. What are you doing? I mean, other than just really sparking good conversations with people, which clearly you are natural
Mhm.
at, you're gifted at just pulling out these feelings, these emotions, and these
Mhm.
thoughts. How do you do that, professionally? What's the main work that you're doing?
Professionally, so it boils down to a couple of different things. One of them is my ability to hold space. So one of my superpowers is generosity of acceptance, which means I really plug into radical acceptance, which doesn't mean that I love everything about where I am or anybody else should or anything either. It is accepting where you are instead of plugging into the resistance of where you are or trying to fight it,
Okay.
and like using the hand that you're dealt and deciding how do you want to move forward. So it's taking that approach and helping other people accept themselves and giving them a place to practice doing that authentically where it's safe, so that they can take that out into the rest of the world.
Generosity of acceptance. That's beautiful. So okay. So if that's where you are now,
Mm-hmm.
and this is how you move through life now, is
Mm-hmm.
accepting what's been dealt, accepting what you have, and figuring out what to do with it. This is how you're going through life right now. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
And teaching others to do the same.
Oh yeah.
If I were to guess, because you already teased us with it,
Uh-huh.
the a major turning point in your life, or a big, let's call it a climax,
Mm-hmm.
is that year that you just described
Mm-hmm.
between your brother dying
Mm-hmm.
and your boyfriend passing, and what that brought up for you.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right that you like, do you just
Oh yeah,
automatically go
that,
to like, oh yeah, that's the turning point?
like when I go back to that time, Like I'm definitely a person like my entire life that always felt that everything had meaning. I've been through some stuff and I would not go back and change a single thing. Like I would
Hmm.
want it to have exactly the same because I love who I am and I
And is that who
accept
you
who I am.
were as a kid?
It
Were
is.
you taught that young? How did that come up?
It's funny because I chew on how. So like we don't have enough time to describe like all the family dynamics that I have, but I have younger brothers and sisters on my dad's side because I grew up in a split family that didn't have the same connection with my grandparents because my grandparents raised me when I was younger,
Hmm.
but also didn't have the same type of support and unconditional love that I had moving
Mm,
throughout my younger life. And so I go back to it and I know that it's like my grandparents, my paternal grandparents that were the ones that built that for me and gave me that underlying like reassurance and knowing that I was unconditionally loved.
yeah.
Um and
How did
didn't
they show that? What do you remember? Like, was it,
they were just
like,
always present and there weren't arguments and there wasn't it was just peaceful. Like that's
mhm,
one of my core needs is peace.
yeah.
Um, but it was just always peaceful and it was always okay. And it was just always connection. And I was like, I don't know, there was just so much love between me and my grandparents. And I got to do everything with them all the time for years.
Is there a moment that really like you think of like what represents kind of my childhood with them? Like, is there like where again, did they take you to the museum and you remember that? Do you know what I mean?
I
Like, or was
would,
it just
yeah,
like,
I was just always with them and our
yeah,
family. Like that's one of
yeah,
the things too. One of the difference between like my younger siblings and me was the fact that it was still what everybody did, like was to always have family reunions and go meet second aunts and uncles and see third cousins. And so I knew who all those people were. And because I don't know, I was kind of a good kid. So like
yeah,
when I was around, like all of our family and friends loved me and vice versa. So that was always there. And even though things got more traumatic as I started to get older and my dad married a second wife, it was just I already had that foundation. And
yeah.
if I hadn't had that, things would be completely different. Hands down,
And
no
and
doubt
so was
whatsoever.
that wasn't just you feeling that and you
Mhm.
absorbing it. Did you also go out into the
Oh,
world like
for
that? You're
sure.
going into
Like
school and you're like, why are they treating each other that way? Like, was there,
Not that so much at school. I can remember being very guarded. We went to a small school and it like that was a whole nother mess. But when I went to church or other places like that, it was that way. And it
yeah.
wasn't, I didn't have the awareness. It's kind of funny because people will tell my son now, my teenage son, you know, you're special or there's something about you. And he doesn't want anything to do with that. And I can
Mm,
remember when I was young and a teenager, people telling me that, and I didn't push it away, but I also didn't understand it. I was just like, okay. Like, but
yeah.
people used to call me, I mean, they called me Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farms because obviously that's what you call anybody named Rebecca. But they called me Sunshine. One of my aunts actually still calls me Pollyanna because I always find the thing to be grateful about. So it was just
Hmm.
like that's what it all goes back to. And also something I remember Brene Brown talking about and really resonating with is the fact that a lot of like the resiliency and the ability to be able to fill those things is being able to plug into something that you're grateful for consistently. And
Wow.
that's what I do. So I would have to say, going back and looking at the things with my grandparents, that's what it was. They taught me how to be grateful. They were grateful. That was just a theme that was in my entire life at that point that I carried through.
Are they still around?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And still the same
Oh, yeah,
people.
absolutely. Yep.
It's not incredible. I mean, you just look at legacy, I guess, and the kind of
Hmm.
the it's the kind of things that have you talked to them about that? Have like how intentional were they
I
on
don't think it was
teaching you that?
intentional. Yeah, I don't think
Isn't
it was.
that
I just think
incredible?
it just was the core of who they were.
Right.
And I have like we haven't had long extensive conversations about it, but I can tell you that my grandfather will call me and tell me that my card made him cry because I always allude to the things again going back to being grateful,
Yeah.
allude to the things that I was very grateful about that they were able to give me.
Yeah. It's it's the kind of thing that does stand out that I remember somebody saying to me, like, Alex, you're so grateful for everything. And this is
Mhm.
like, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago, more. And I was like, it was that confusing kind of moment of
Mhm.
like, what do you mean? Isn't this just what we
How
do?
it goes. That's the
Yeah.
deal, right?
And then realizing, oh, that is actually a superpower. That is
Superpower.
a thing that I
Mhm.
have that for whatever reason. I actually look a lot of it to I have a lot of food allergies.
Mhm.
And so like anaphylactic. And so growing up, I ate
Mhm.
cardboard and styrofoam. Like that was,
Mhm.
it was before being vegan was cool. And so there was just no options.
Right.
And so now I can really pinpoint it down to like, if there's something that I can eat, I eat it and I'm grateful for it.
Mhm.
And I think that that expanded out to, if there's something that I can do, if there's something given to me, then I'll do it.
Mhm.
I'll take it.
Mhm.
And like, why would I complain? Why?
Mhm.
And for somebody like your grandparents, who that's just
Mhm.
how they lived,
Mhm.
but now look at you talk about this in a public forum and say, who I am is because of who they were.
Mhm.
Um, that's such a beautiful thing. And it's something that I think that we all have. If I were to pinpoint it to a person, it would be my mom who helped me be who I am. But you're right.
Mhm.
She wasn't, how can I form Alex to be who he
Right.
will
That's what we
be?
do now because we're so bombarded with like information and awareness. You can't help but do that. But back in the day, like that wasn't there. It was just either inherently a part of who you were or it wasn't.
Yeah. Okay. So you get dealt that hand
Uh-huh.
and you choose to receive it,
Uh-huh.
to be that,
Mhm.
and you carry that through into high school and again, you're Pollyanna, we're all's good, like let's just be friends.
Mhm.
And then what happens? Where does that
Oh.
begin to twist, turn?
I mean, there's so many twists and turns. Like even when you talk through all that, like especially in my later teenage years, it wasn't all's good and let's be friends. I was so guarded and I was the mean girl, like because I was so guarded that everybody was kept at arm's length, except for probably my grandparents and my aunt.
What were you guarding? What were you protecting yourself from?
I don't know if I've ever chewed on that piece. Just
Oh
like
boy.
everything I went through. Like there's so many things. Like I said, there's not enough time, but it was just another thing in my family at that time at home was the fact that we didn't express our emotions.
Mm,
We repressed them, we didn't talk about them, we avoided situations. All communication was conflict. So it was very much like probably just a lot of that stuff was pent up and I didn't know what to do with it. Um,
yeah.
and thank goodness I was super active because if that wasn't the case, I can't imagine how that could have taken shape.
Yeah.
But like I ran away from home when I was 16. I eloped at 18 after I knew somebody for 2.5 weeks. Like it just turned into this whole like we're gonna fail forward like nobody's ever seen before in their life. And
Can you
that's
take
what
me
I
through
did.
that eloping? Like what is, because I hear eloping, I picture Vegas. Like what,
Uh-huh.
at you're 18, you're
At
like, what I'm gonna
18 in Ionia County, Michigan, it looks very much like I worked in a bar at the time. I was waitressing with my best friend.
still
And
not at home. You ran away and
oh,
stayed away.
that's a whole nother story. So if you want to go back to that and get the Cliff Notes version, I ran away from home, was gone for a couple of months. My mom, who I did not grow up with, heard that I had run away from home after a couple of months, came and found me, took me back home. My stepmom told my dad that I couldn't move back in, otherwise she was going to leave him and take their 4 kids. And she was renowned for like running away with my brothers and sisters during their relationship. So my dad put me in a little travel trailer on the same property that had no running water, and that's where I had to live for half a year.
It's like,
And
this is the this is the thing, right? So you're, the way that you're telling your story, I don't want to come back to
Mhm.
the eloping thing. We'll get
Uh-huh.
there. But this is what you have, I think, is what's so relatable, because
Mhm.
you're talking about all these moments that many of us have not lived through anything like. And you're like, I've
Mhm.
got all these moments, and that's a whole other story, and that's a whole other
Uh-huh.
story, and that's a whole other story. This is
Uh-huh.
actually what, this is the TV series analogy, right? Like there's this whole series of who you were and how you've changed to
Mhm.
become somebody who goes through life with this generosity of acceptance. Why? Because I learned it when I was young, and I learned gratitude, and now here I am being grateful and teaching others. Like there's this real beautiful transformation. But all along the way, there's all these big and complicated and intricate and overwhelming stories
many.
that for you to show up on a podcast and tell them all is truly impossible. But what you just gave us there was like an episode. Like if your life is a TV series, what you just gave us was one episode where all that goes down. Maybe that's actually a season. I don't know how much we're going to, but maybe it's a couple episodes, but it's, you know what I mean? Like it's that sort of thing where this is a really heavy one and it ends up with you living in a trailer on the property. And then we go forward from there. And maybe the next episode, maybe the next season, I don't know, is, oh, I meet this guy. I'm working at a bar.
Yep.
Then what you see? So like, the beauty of this is you just get to choose. You get to choose what stories you tell and what you lean into and don't. But we just don't need to be afraid of those complicated things. We just need to recognize them as like, this is a significant part. It's just a moment. Do we want to go into that?
Like
nah,
it doesn't.
Another one.
It doesn't define us. Like, I think that's the biggest thing that one of the biggest gifts I'm able to give my clients and people that I just have conversation with is, look at all these things I've been through and you can still be okay. Like you can go through these things and be okay. Like you do have a choice. You decide at the end of the day, you have the power to choose differently and you can. So if you want to understand it, that's great, but you don't have to understand it to do it.
What's the other option? If you're like, you can go through this stuff and be okay, what's the other option? What are people
sitting in it and letting it define you?
In what, like how?
I don't know, becoming your trauma, like becoming the thing that traumatized you and letting that lead everything that you do in your life.
So because I went through this story, because I went through rejection or I was rejected.
Have you ever seen What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams?
Oh my goodness. I saw that in theaters when did it come out? I must have been 13. It did not 90s, make a lick of sense to me.
So that not very much.
That was the worst Robin Williams movie I'd ever seen. I'm like, I want Hook. I want Mrs. Doubtfire. Let's go see Robin Williams. What is happening? You don't want to
feel the heavy things, huh?
I just didn't get it. I didn't get it. I've seen it since, and yes,
it kind of reminds me of that. So he went to save his wife. His wife committed suicide, and I think in the movie, like it was portrayed as she was in hell, and he couldn't save her, but it was killing him not to have her. So he actually put himself in hell to go get her, and ended up like absorbing all of the energies and emotions that she had become and was, and then they started to take him over. So it's like leaning into all of those heavy things and forgetting that we have the power to shift them or
to not become them,
and not like refusing to feel them. Like we numb them or we try to bypass them or we keep reacting instead of trying to understand it or even just feel it and again move through it. And when you can't move through it, like you're just going to keep bumping into it. So like that's how it defines you.
It's so interesting. This is just going to turn to a movie podcast actually, but this is the thing. And I've talked about Good Will Hunting as well in this podcast again, but think of Robin Williams and that link of a wife who died.
Yeah.
Right. So he's that character in this movie who comes in and he's not willing to even talk about her.
Yep.
And then through.
And he also gives one of the most beautiful speeches about what love actually is.
Exactly. Sitting on the bench with him there. Right. And well, yeah, he wasn't there for the game because he had to go see about a girl. It's when you know, so this whole thing of when he goes of going into that. So he's resisting it, resisting that pain. He's experienced it and he knows it, but he's resisting it. But then also through helping somebody else through his pain, he starts to release, Robin Williams starts to release what he's gone through and realize that it doesn't have to define him. He moves on in the story. It's all beautiful. And I think that's what we're getting at here, right? Is like, there's this effort that for you to not allow these things to define you has taken intentional choice along the way. Okay. Eloping.
Uh-huh.
Tell us this story.
So eloping, so I had run away from home. I ended up halfway through that school year somehow, I don't even know really. Like I've had this conversation a couple of times in the last couple of weeks. I don't really know who convinced my dad to let me move in with my best friend and her dad. Maybe it was me. I don't remember that part, but I ended up moving in with them. And then we had a whole incident there. And so then my best friend and I ended up moving in with her mom, which was in a different school district. And so we moved over there. I finished school, but I was actually working 2 jobs and going to school. So I was falling asleep during class. Didn't graduate because I was short on my credits because I wasn't doing my work because I was sleeping in class. So I ended up getting out of school. I think we got kicked out of her mom's house at some point. Her mom worked 3rd shifts and we would have people over and we would drive, we called it car tag. We would like drive the back roads with our cars and play tag, jump on the trampoline until 3:00 in the morning with the radio blasting, like, and so at some point we ended up moving out, and I think I ended up moving in like with my boyfriend and his mom and sister. Was there for a little while. Then I moved across the street with some other friends. And then at some point I had started working at this bar. Well, this bar was owned by my future husband's uncle and former brother-in-law. So somebody who had been married to his sister. He came home on leave from the Marine Corps. I was totally lacking in self-worth. Like if I could get a guy's attention, that's all it took. And I wasn't trying to, but I just had no self-value. Like that piece was totally missing. Totally codependent, very needy, like just all the things. And he came home, and I don't know if it was jokingly or not, but one night, like we got joking around about like, oh, well, if we got married, I'm in the Marine Corps, we get a cost of living raise. If we get married, I'll split it with you. And I was like, sure, why not? So I made up some ridiculous story and went to my dad, told him why I needed my birth certificate. And he knew it was total BS, but he didn't say anything at the time, gave me my birth certificate. And looking back, I'm like, Dad, you knew, like you knew. So ended up going and eloping. And I mean, we didn't even have our own witnesses. I wore a pair of jeans and my grandma's cable knit sweater. Like it was just nothing special at all.
Yeah.
We decided we kind of liked each other, and then he got stationed in Hawaii. So then we moved to Hawaii for like a year. So that's the short version.
And how long did that last?
We were married for 5 years, but separated for 3+.
Okay. So this is what's so fascinating. Again, what you just brought us into, we had this childhood of you of like generosity, acceptance, or like gratefulness. And you just brought us into, and then there was this, like, as you said, you got guarded in high school and so lashed out and all this sort of stuff. And it just seems to go, I don't know, down where it's this, lack of self-worth, total non-acceptance and needing to find value wherever you can. And it takes you down all these different roads and difficult roads. Then that happens. Sure, let's get married. I don't know. And it just seems like that's of course, this is what happens when you have no boundaries. You're guarded with no boundaries. It's almost like
that's
right?
True story. Yeah. Yep. And not
Somebody
a good
needs
one.
to hear that. Are you guarding yourself with no boundaries? Come on.
Yeah.
So, okay. So if we already teased this earlier, but we've got this transformative year, where is that in relation to?
So when I got married, I was 18 years old. When my brother passed away, I was 32. Okay. 33. I was 33, I think.
So you keep going along and becoming who?
So what the real transformation was having my son. that was the first big gear that started shifting, because I was in a toxic, super toxic relationship with his dad. We were together for 7 years. It was a mess. It still is a mess. And when I had my son and looked at not only what my childhood with my dad had been, not my grandparents so much, but my dad and that situation, and then my younger siblings on that side, I really started to question, like, is this like, are these the lessons and the experiences and the ways I want my son to define his life?
Mm,
Because we lead by example. So if
yeah.
this is my example, this is exactly what his life is going to look like too. And I also, because of being so close with my grandparents and my family, I had a lot of knowledge about our past history, like the good, the bad, the ugly, and knew where all those pieces stood and how they affected things. And so I wasn't willing anymore to take those things to him. So I started really doing a lot of personal work because I didn't want to pass those things on to him. So
Right.
he was the initial factor that started shifting everything. But then after that, the boyfriend that passed away, when I had my son, his dad and I were still together for several years. We broke up. Eventually, I started dating again because I also, in that process, wanted to fix my dating style, because obviously that was not working for me. And so I did a lot of work there. um but then all those things you were, or that you learn about good relationships, they don't just translate to romantic relationships, they translate to all relationships. So
Mm,
you talk about healthy boundaries and
yeah.
clear expectations and high standards and self-worth. Those things all started to really shift and provide a better platform for me, or a better foundation for me. And then in the meantime, I decided I was good enough to start dating again. So I started dating. I found Jamar, and Jamar was the one who, like, looking back, I can see the pieces. Of course, like, it didn't make sense at the time, nor was it welcome in the way that it played out at the time.
Right.
But he was the one that really taught me to love myself. Like,
Wow.
he was the one that let me show up. He was the one that radically accepted me. He was the one that normalized expressing emotions without having to react to them. Like, he was the one that built all those things for me
Mm-hmm.
and then moved it forward. But when my brother passed away, the other piece that really changed things there was he left me his house. So we moved to a completely different city, and I was a single mother raising a small child. I was in the restaurant industry at the time, but when I moved here, I knew if I wanted to make more money that I would have to go into management, and I wasn't doing or willing to do that at the
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice of losing time with my son. So I ended up applying for all the jobs I didn't think I could get, ended up in an email marketing position, but then wanted to supplement my income, which then led me to Airbnb hosting out of my home. And that was the piece that led me to life coaching. And Lori Harder is a big piece of that, because she was the person that was in my ears all of the time while I'm doing
Right.
all of this exploration. So, like, having my son, learning how to love myself, or being taught
Mm-hmm.
how to love myself, and then being given the opportunity to have complete strangers in my home and be able to hold space for them and connect with them in a way that just,
So this wasn't just Airbnb, like I'm out of town, come and use my house. This is
no,
like
they slept in a
they
room in my
walk in
house. And
and you're interacting with all these
one of
people.
my best friends is an old Airbnb guest.
That needs
So
to be their slogan now. It's like bringing friendships, building
yep,
friendships since
right.
2006. Uh, uh, there's this really beautiful thing that's happening there
Hmm.
that, like, I almost could see that the healing happening over between, like, yeah, you've got like 18, 16, 18 up through your 20s. You've got this separated for 3 years, divorced, then and then into
Hmm.
another marriage, and then or relationship, and then that's
Hmm.
toxic, and but your son comes out of that, and
Hmm.
learning how to love him was like this opening up of your heart,
Hmm.
like your true sense of love that you had closed off up to this point, or had been in the
Hmm.
practice of closing off and guarding
Hmm.
yourself against. You're now like, oh man, this boy needs it.
Mhm.
needs me, and I don't even know what that is, but I'm gonna
I'm still
learn.
trying to figure that out.
Well, there we
He's a
go.
teenager, so
So yeah, there's a different kind of love every stage, right?
yeah.
But you're open.
Mhm.
And that opening up is something that, again, like the relatability of the story, that there's, if you're listening to this and you feel like you're closed off, there is a guard up.
Mhm.
You know that you're capable of love. You know that, like, right, you were telling us that that's who you're brought up. There's this deep foundation of radical love and
Mhm.
gratefulness, but then you started to close yourself off, and then have this, you produce another human. You create life,
Mhm.
and in that you start to find your own. And then this, and then Jamar comes into your life and starts to
Mhm.
fill in that heart that has been opened.
Mhm.
Like, once again, it's almost like a reminder of all the things that your grandparents taught you. He's now reminding you of all of that and helping you see it anew. After all the brokenness, you are
Mhm.
still whole, you are still good, you are still pure. Like, all of that comes in, which allows you to move through two significant losses and find healing and gratitude and gratefulness through it, which you wouldn't have been equipped for otherwise.
Oh gosh, no. Mm-mm. And I think that's like
Wow.
one of the most beautiful pieces too is like that vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of people ask me like, how can you be so vulnerable about things? And even Brene Brown, going back to her again, I love her if you can't tell.
Oh gosh, she's got
His
it. She shows up more than anybody in these episodes.
but she talks about, vulnerability and how like we don't share all the vulnerable pieces of ourselves with other people until it doesn't, like, I can't remember exactly how she says it, but basically until unless you're sure that it doesn't hold any power over you, you don't share it. But I have like being vulnerable, and that's part of what I do too, is the piece that takes that shame, the guilt, the whatever, the judgment, it takes that piece out, because if I can set it on the table and talk about it and move through it and feel it
Mhm.
and process it, it doesn't have power over me.
Yeah.
So the
Well, she
more
she
that
also
I'm
says vulnerability without boundaries is oversharing.
Mhm. Right.
And so there's that understanding of, I can put this out there,
Mhm.
but I know who's around the table right
Mhm. And
now. Or
that's
I
another
can,
piece. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, or I can put that. I just knowing who's listening.
Mhm. But the other piece for me too is like when I share things like this, and this is something that's been really helpful for some of my friends, is there's no expectations. Like when I share it, it's a gift and you get to do with it whatever you want to. So just putting it that way,
Mm,
I'm not expecting anything from this. It's yours to do with what you want. And if you don't receive it, that's great too. Like it's
that's
whatever
so
you need it
interesting.
to be.
That's why people are afraid of showing up, because
Mhm.
they're afraid of being inauthentic,
Mhm.
and they're afraid of being vulnerable at the risk that people will see that as inauthentic.
Mhm.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm. There's
so for
power
me,
in that. Yeah.
but
I mean, there's
for me to
mhm.
show up and share something about my life, for you to share this, people can receive this
Mhm.
as, oh, she's just sharing this story just to get attention, just to stand out.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
And
you're like,
that's okay.
yeah, that's how you receive it. But
Mhm.
I'm sharing my story. This is me being vulnerable in the right way. Like, this is me
Mhm.
sharing this with you, opening up. Um, but may that not stop you. May that not hold you back from sharing that stuff, because somebody else is receiving this and saying, you're kidding, you too.
Mhm.
I need this. And I
Mhm.
need to know that I can get through it as well.
Mhm.
That's the power of it all. So I'm just so grateful that you're doing this, that you are so influenced by Brene Brown, and that you are doing exactly what she
Whatever,
calls
Fast and
us
the
to
Furious.
do. Same thing, really. I'm sure that she's
Right?
deep into those movies. Are you kidding me? So, um, but doing that in sharing not just the most vulnerable, it's not just opening your wound and saying, here,
Mhm.
everybody, take a look. It's because you've done the work to see what it means,
Mhm.
to identify the feelings.
Mhm.
And in that, you're inviting us through that to experience that same transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so powerful what you're doing.
Amazing.
Again, clearly you are gifted at holding that space
Mm-hmm.
that Lori held for you, that
Mm-hmm.
over podcasts and whatever that was, that you find somebody who can encourage you, who can bring you in and give you some of that footing, some of that guidance to take that next step and really turn what you're experiencing into something that can help others.
Mm-hmm.
And you're doing exactly that same thing. So well done, you, Rebecca.
Thank you. I definitely found my purpose through a whole mess of things.
Well, and this is it. So I would say, if yours is a story of what, guarding yourself, yours is a story of being closed off to being opened up,
Mm-hmm.
from guarding to generosity, then somebody is listening to this and again finding themselves in that place
Mm-hmm.
and feeling like they need to keep themselves closed off, or doesn't want to anymore but doesn't know what the next step is.
Oh yeah,
And
that's the hardest part.
they want what you have and where you're at. um how should they get that conversation started? Where do they find you and say, help me?
Mm-hmm. So I'm on Instagram as mariavenus.com. And that's got a whole story behind it too. Marie is actually my middle name, and I was named after my grandmother, but it was also what Jamar called me. He called me Marie, not Rebecca.
Hmm.
So, and then Venus, love. So that always has to show up. So Maria Venus is my Instagram handle, mariavenus.com. And then you can find me on Facebook at The Energy Architect, because it's also
Brilliant.
about the energy. Yeah.
All the stuff that we didn't even touch today.
Right.
You are, it's like levels upon levels upon levels, with you and what you're working on, what your mission is, the future impact that you see for yourself.
Mm.
And I'm so excited for you, and I'm so grateful for your time here and sharing this story, diving in, going all over the place, and really leading people towards this spirit of generous acceptance. I mean, how much more beautiful could it be, other than maybe, a car flying into a helicopter and
We're duct taping a rocket, to the top of what is a Fiero?
like
Yep.
it all
Bringing
counts.
it
It
full
all belongs.
circle. Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate this and the conversation as always.
Mm-hmm.